Welcome to Voodoo Whiskey Gaming, and this is my late review of The Sinking City. I played it on the PS4, it's also available on the Xbox One, PC, and Nintendo Switch. So The Sinking City is based on Lovecraftian ideas, the works of H.P. Lovecraft, etc. You play as Charles Reed, a private detective out of Boston who has traveled to Oakmont because he's having all sorts of weird visions and has been drawn to the city. He hopes to investigate and find out why he's having these visions, and over the course of his investigation, he discovers all sorts of other stuff. He discovers all sorts of weird political and social and religious and crazy cult stuff going on in the city. And as interesting as all of that stuff could have been, it's just not well done in this game. And a lot of that for me was the character of Charles Reed. Specifically the fact that, and this is going to go into audio and visual, they just didn't do a good job with him. And I think it may have been an artistic choice to make him the way he was. I say that because he's monotone, and he has zero facial expressions most of the time, unless high as fuck is a facial expression now. The few times he showed some vocal range or had some facial expressions were during side missions, so they weren't even revolving around the main story. Not only that, he stands around with his hands like this at all times and barely moves them and is just completely monotone and doesn't really make eye contact with you, and he looks like a pangolin. He looks like when a pangolin is standing on its back legs, and he just looks awkward as fuck and high as shit. Because of all of that, he seemed so very uninterested in what was going on, despite the fact it seemed to have major effects on him. Like, the story is telling you that all of this has a major effect on him, but he's not showing it at all, and it just really created this major disconnect. So on to the audio. I've obviously already criticized Charles Reed's voice acting, all of that, because it really wasn't well done, which is weird because the other characters are well voice acted. For the most part. I mean, it's not the highest end stuff, but it's still well done. As for the music and sound effects, I think those are well done. They do a good job building this creepy atmosphere. They really do help build the world. They help with the creatures, they help with just what is going on. The only thing that wasn't really good was the gun sound effects. Those were pretty cheesy and not very realistic at all. Now, as for the gameplay, this is an open world exploration investigative game with some third-person shooting and some, of course, RPG elements, because every game needs those now. I will say, the RPG elements in this game felt completely unnecessary. They could have been left out of this game and it wouldn't have made any difference whatsoever. As for the fact that it was open world, I really enjoyed that, although I will say, until you get the fast travel points unlocked, it's kind of a burden on the game. Because the world itself is not super interesting, because a lot of the people just repeat the same things. It's not really a living, breathing world. As for the investigation stuff, I actually really enjoyed that until I realized that that's all the game is. Every case you do, whether it's a main mission or a side mission, they all revolve around the exact same mechanics. And you use every single mechanic in every single one, so it just kind of gets to be way too much of the same thing and it gets a little old. As for the shooting portion, the creatures move around in weird ways so it becomes hard to shoot them, and it just gets a little obnoxious. The combat doesn't really work great in the game. That includes the melee, which is, wow, horrible. Just straight up horrible. There's just a lot of things that they were trying and they could have done well, but weren't done well, and it ends up just weighing down the entire experience. You can actually explore too much to the point where you find yourself trapped in spaces that you can't get out of and you have to actually reload a previous save to unfuck the situation. Also, with the different investigative mechanics, which there are quite a few, but not enough considering how frequently you use them, you could really use a proper tutorial. Whenever they introduce something new, they're like, oh hey, you can go check out this in a different menu to see how to do these things, rather than just give you a little tutorial on it. And the environments in the world are just kind of very repetitive. Over the course of several missions, I realized that I was going into essentially the same building. It really wasn't the same building, it was in a completely different part of town, but it looked the exact same as a dozen other buildings I had been in. So that just got a little old and it started to wear on you. You kind of got fatigued from seeing the exact same environment over and over and over and over and over and over. Lastly, the controls. They work well for the most part. Moving around works fine. I would say interacting with objects is pretty sketchy. They really needed to work on that. And the aiming is not great, so fighting these creatures that move in such weird ways becomes far more difficult than it needs to. And then there are parts of the city that are flooded and you have to use a boat, and piloting that boat is horseshit. Just horseshit. Moving around works, but it's just not as good as it could be. Just none of the controls work as well as they could. And there were times where they wouldn't respond. And there was no explanation as to why they wouldn't. I eventually figured out that, oh, if there's a monster not too far away, mind you, not necessarily a threat, but not too far away, you can't use certain things. There were times where my flashlight wouldn't turn on. It was annoying. Then lastly, there's the visuals. There are some things that look pretty good, and that's about as good as it gets, is pretty good. Nothing really looks excellent in this game, and man, it drags certain things down. Because while the game itself does nail a pretty good atmosphere, graphics don't do some of the imagery justice. There were times where my character was supposed to be hallucinating and, again, freaking out, but Charles Reed was animated as a blank slate, wouldn't freak out, and it just didn't work. And then there were times where like stuff was really cloudy looking. I don't know how else to describe it, and when it was really cloudy looking, you just couldn't necessarily see something that you needed to see that was supposed to be creepy, and it wasn't done in a way that was like, oh, it's supposed to be mysterious. No, it was just poor visuals. Then you've got the fact that when you're exploring the city, the draw distance is atrocious. Texture popping is hideous, and things, people, just all sorts of stuff appears out of nowhere. And even when it's not that far away, so it's not a great looking game either. So to wrap this up, it's a cool idea, but unfortunately there is nothing in this game that is so excellent that it really pulled me in and kept me going. But at the same time, there is nothing that I truly hated. I mean, honestly, my favorite part of the game was the fact that I could save right before the end and go back and get the different endings. That's not a ringing endorsement for the game. What can I say? One of my other complaints with this game is that it's a full price game, but the quality is not full price. Not even AAA. I'm not even saying that. I'm just saying that everything falls short of what it could be, and therefore it just isn't worth the money. So to wrap this up, unfortunately, as interesting of an idea as it is, I've got to say skip it. Okay, so in the comments below, why don't you tell me who your favorite, horror author is? I gotta say, I am a fan of, Stephen King and H.P. Lovecraft. And as always, thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please hit that like button. And if you like what I'm doing in general, share, subscribe. Have a good one.